the city started coming apart in ways nobody saw coming. At Bellevue, patients were lined up on stretchers in the hallways, while doctors worked through them like they were sorting wreckage. The emergency ward had tripled its size, bleeding into armories and public schools that were turned into hospitals overnight. But people kept showing up. Telephone operators, mostly young women who spent all day connecting calls, started dying at their switchboards. The endless "number, please," that had become the background noise of the city got patchy, then went silent across whole neighborhoods. Families who tried calling for a doctor or an undertaker got nothing. The city's phone system was dying one operator at a time. Entire blocks started smelling of death. New York's morgues, built to handle the usual flow, filled up in days. Coffin makers worked through the night and still couldn't keep up. In the tenements where immigrant families had been building their lives, a new signal appeared: purple or black cloth hanging from windows to mark a death inside. Bodies sat on fire escapes, waiting for collection wagons that showed up later each day, if they came at all. Undertaker James Murphy talked about scenes that he said stuck with him for decades. "We'd get to a building and find 3-4 families dead on different floors," he recalled. The living had run. Sometimes you'd find kids 8 or 9 years old, maybe taking care of younger ones, because every adult in the building was gone. The city's sounds changed completely. Street vendors, car horns, construction, all of it got drowned out by the incessant ringing of ambulance bells. They rang so often that people simply stopped reacting. You'd hear one and not even turn your head. Worse than the noise, however, was the quiet. Those moments when whole blocks seemed to go perfectly still, as if talking too loud might let the thing inside. Essential workers were stuck with an ugly choice: leave and watch the city fall apart, or keep working and probably get sick. Garbage collectors kept making their rounds, even as their coworkers vanished, letting trash pile up in a city already drowning in corpses. Nobody wanted to see what was happening. Down in the subway tunnels, maintenance crews found strange things. Little shrines where people had left photos of the dead, empty medicine bottles on platforms, and handwritten notes pinned to walls. Desperate messages from people trying to reach anyone who might still be out there in a world that felt like it was dying one breath at a time. Dr. Royal Copeland made a choice that terrified half the city and puzzled the other half. Philadelphia had shut everything down after their Liberty Loan Parade killed thousands. San Francisco put masks on everyone. Copeland looked at both approaches and went in the opposite direction. His reasoning: panic kills more than disease. New York would stay open. But he didn't just throw the doors wide and hope for the best. Copeland told businesses to stagger their hours, stores opening at different times, offices shifting schedules so people weren't packed into subway cars during the rush hour. This sounds obvious now, but in 1918, it was strange enough that some business owners thought he'd lost his mind. Instead of emptying the subways, he tried to manage the flow of bodies through them. Schools were the real fight. While most cities closed classrooms, Copeland kept them open. His reason was dark. Kids in tenements were crammed 6 to a room, with windows that never opened, and disease moved through those spaces like water through a sieve. Schools had ventilation. Schools had space. Teachers checked students every morning for symptoms, basically turning into medical screeners overnight. A child is safer in school than on the street or at home, Copeland argued. Parents hated hearing it, but the math was hard to argue with. Theaters could stay open if they followed strict rules. Better ventilation, fewer seats sold, and a total shutdown the second someone got sick. Dance halls and saloons, however, were closed. Copeland's thinking was that you could track who went to a theater. But bars were just crowds of people, breathing on each other in the dark, with no way to know who'd been there. The Met kept performing while neighborhood bars went dark. His real tool, though, was the newspapers. Every morning, Copeland's column ran in multiple papers. Practical advice, a calm tone, the kind of voice that made you feel like someone knew what they were doing. Do not spit in public places. Avoid crowds when possible. Fresh air is your best protection. People read it like instructions for survival, because that's exactly what it was. The Spit Spreads Death campaign went everywhere. Subway walls, shop windows, tenement hallways. Cops started fining people for spitting, which had been as common as smoking. The whole city became conscious of things it had never thought about before. Breathing near strangers, touching railings, standing too close. Some said Copeland cared more about keeping businesses open than keeping people alive. Maybe that was part of it. But Philadelphia's parade had killed more Americans than some battles in France. Copeland was betting that managing the city carefully would work better than shutting it down completely. That a city still functioning could survive better than one that had stopped breathing. By December, the results would either prove him right or destroy his reputation. New York had chosen to face the virus by adapting instead of hiding. Whether that was brave or reckless depended entirely on who you asked, and whether you were still alive to ask it. When the Spanish flu finally loosened its grip on New York in early 1919, the city that emerged wasn't the same one that had entered the fall of 1918. The numbers were grim: 33,000 dead in 4 months, and life expectancy down 12 years. But those figures didn't capture the orphaned children, the shuttered shops that stayed dark, or the families who had to redefine what normal meant without half their members. The forgetting started fast. Soldiers came home to parades, the jazz age cranked up, and everyone seemed eager to move on from the war and everything else that had gone wrong. No one built monuments to the telephone operators who died at their switchboards, or the undertakers who worked until they collapsed. The pandemic became something you mentioned quietly, if at all. Families remembered, but the city as a whole seemed to want to move forward. Still, things had changed in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The Department of Health wasn't the same sleepy office it had been. It came out of 1918 as something closer to a command center, tracking disease across millions of people, analyzing patterns, and responding faster. Those daily death counts Copeland published turned into sophisticated surveillance systems that could map outbreaks down to individual blocks. People argued for years about whether Copeland got it right. San Francisco and Milwaukee locked down hard and saw fewer deaths per capita, but their economies tanked. Philadelphia's parade became the textbook example of what not to do. New York landed somewhere in the middle, not the best death rate, but not the worst. That made Copeland's approach hard to judge. Maybe he saved lives. Maybe he just saved his reputation. Historians still can't agree. But some of what he did stuck around. Staggered hours became a standard move during crowded emergencies. Keeping some things open while closing others became the template, and his newspaper columns, straightforward, practical, and relentlessly calm, even when things were falling apart, became the model for how officials talked to the public during a crisis. The kids who sang those rhymes about Enza grew up with certain ideas baked into their worldview. They pushed for better hospitals, building codes that prevented the kind of overcrowding that had turned tenements into morgues, and streets that didn't trap people on top of each other. They'd learned something their parents hadn't known. Density could save you or kill you, depending entirely on what was moving through those crowded streets alongside the usual traffic. By the time the next big crisis hit, New York had something it didn't have in 1918. Not just memories, those fade, but systems. The work of counting cases, tracing contacts, and telling people the truth, even when it wasn't comforting. All that had been built into how the city operated. The public forgot the pandemic, but the machinery of the city remembered, and that turned out to matter. The Spanish flu didn't end with a victory parade or a newspaper headline. declaring triumph over disease. It faded the way fevers break in the night, leaving behind a city that had learned the hard way what it costs to be connected. New York came out of 1918, carrying contradictions it never fully resolved. The subway tunnels that had terrified people went back to moving millions to work every day. The tenement hallways, where families hung purple cloth in their windows, filled up again, with kids playing and neighbors talking. The telephone exchanges where operators died at their posts came back online, reconnecting a city that had nearly gone silent. But something had changed in how New Yorkers thought about what made them strong. The density that turned the city into an economic powerhouse had also turned it into a perfect hunting ground for something invisible that moved through breath and touch. Every handshake, every crowded elevator, every packed theater now held the quiet memory of October 1918, when those same things became ways to die. Dr. Copeland's decision to keep the city open created a blueprint that outlasted him and the pandemic both. Future health commissioners would face their own impossible choices. Polio outbreaks, the early days of AIDS, and crises no one saw coming, knowing that a city can't hide from disease, but it can't ignore it either. The Spanish flu proved that survival takes something harder than courage or caution. It takes the delicate, dangerous work of staying human when the losses pile up beyond what feels survivable.